This is Scoops reporting for the television and radio network. It's June 30th, 1969, and I'm here in New York City at the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in Greenwich Village, which is currently the site of ongoing riots after patrons pushed back against an attempted police raid. Now, Illinois repealed its laws against homosexuality in 1961, but in the 5 years since, no other state has followed suit. Despite the patrons engaging in illegal activities, one has to ask, was the raid just? Or are the police engaging in Prohibition-era tactics for Prohibition-era ideals? Here to help me answer that question is a man with so many degrees I can't keep them all straight. Please welcome Professor Chronicle.
Thank you, Scoops.
Now, despite the aforementioned laws against homosexuality, and housing discrimination and lack of job protections, the gay and transgender population in New York City is growing, especially here in Greenwich Village. But there isn't much of an opportunity for them to congregate openly, which leads to the creation of establishments like Stonewall.
Correct, Scoops. Not to mention most ordinary bars refuse to serve gay and transgender customers. And the state liquor authority considers gay bars to be places where unlawful practices are habitually carried on by the public. As such, they aren't granted liquor licenses, and the police will come knocking at the doors of gay bars, arrest the patrons, and shut the business down. Earlier in the decade, Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. launched a campaign to rid the city of its gay bars. Stonewall is the latest target on a long list.
But it sounds like things didn't quite go as planned. So what happened?
On the night of June 28th, 4 undercover officers, 2 men and 2 women, entered the bar to gather evidence. Now, standard procedure for these sorts of raids is to line up the patrons, have female officers escort all patrons dressed as women to the restrooms, and instruct them to disrobe. Those appearing physically male would then be arrested. Patrons dressed as women refused to go with the officers, and men in line refused to present their identification. The first person to be arrested, Raymond Castro, shoved the cops, making the arrest on their feet, and that really riled up the crowd. Those who were not arrested were released, but instead of dispersing, most of them stuck around to see what would happen next. Within minutes, around 150 people had gathered in front of the bar, as well as some passers-by. The police tried their best to continue according to procedure. Their poor treatment of the patrons was already on display, as lesbian patrons report that they were felt up inappropriately when they were being frisked. One butch lesbian, who some believe to be Stormy DeLavery, wasn't having any of it. Officers made several attempts to restrain her, but she escaped each time, fighting back against the police. They eventually caught her, but as she was being shoved into the back of a police wagon, she turned to the crowd and exclaimed, "Why don't you guys do something?" And the atmosphere immediately changed.
The unrest became a riot.
Indeed! The police, in an attempt to restrain people, knocked and shoved rioters on the ground. More fuel on the fire. To paraphrase Michael Fader, we all had a collective feeling like we'd had enough of this kind of treatment. It was like the last straw. It was time to reclaim something that had always been taken from us. Even passers-by, who had no connection to the community, sympathized with the patrons and joined them in the fight. The riots carried on into a second night, and that's when one of the most memorable figures from the event, Marsha P. Johnson, came onto the scene. She arrived at Stonewall just expecting a normal night, only to find that police had attempted to set the building on fire!
Good gravy!
But that didn't stop Marsha. She climbed up onto a lamppost and dropped a bag with a brick in it down onto a police car, shattering the windshield. There are even accounts of her throwing either a shot glass or a brick through a window, exclaiming, "I got my civil rights." That might just be one of those, George Washington chopping down a cherry tree stories.
Either way, she sounds tough as nails.
You have to be to survive as a gay or trans person in this day and age. People are getting evicted from houses and tenements just for being who they are. Not to mention getting fired from their jobs. And then there's the more immediate physical risks. Not just of getting arrested, but of getting attacked by your fellow citizen. Miss Johnson had to board the subway in her civilian identity as a man, and then change into her feminine clothes en route to Greenwich. That's why spaces like Stonewall are so important. Because even when it may seem that you are alone, there are people out there who would do anything to help you out. And that's exactly what happened here. Community banded together in the face of injustice and hatred in order to fight for their rights. This isn't the first time they've fought against a common enemy like this, but it is one of the most memorable. These are sad times we live in, Scoops, but as long as the communities have each other and continue making their voices heard, things will get better. I can feel it. Maybe in the future, this event will lead to an increased sense of community as these ragtag misfits coalesce into a family. And maybe, as that family comes together, others will join in and stand with them against the injustice that gay and transgender people face.
Per unitatem vis, for unity, strength. And on that hopefully hopeful note, that's been Chronicle, and I've been Scoops, signing off from Stonewall Inn.